This is also a time of change from my family. The world stood still as Buckingham Palace released a midnight statement that no one saw coming, a chilling announcement that shattered centuries of tradition, rewriting the very foundation of the British Crown. Reporters gasped. Aides froze and the royal corridors echoed with disbelief. The line of succession, sacred and untouchable, had been changed. But who could possibly have the power to alter destiny itself? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began like a whisper, one that quickly grew into a storm. No one could contain the palace, usually meticulous about timing and tone. Oh, a moment that sent shockwaves across the globe. 5 minutes before midnight, the statement arrived, without ceremony, without warning, and most chilling of all, without explanation and adjustment. It read, in accordance with the king's sovereign will. 6 words that carried the weight of a Tayside nation's history, leaving journalists scrambling for clarity and citizens glued to their screens in disbelief. The Crown had spoken, but the silence that followed was louder than any proclamation in living memory. Within moments, major networks interrupted scheduled broadcasts. The BBC's somber tone filled living rooms across Britain as anchors tried to process what even they couldn't fully grasp. CNN, Sky News and every major outlet followed suit, replaying the short statement in an endless loop, dissecting every syllable. Adjustment to what one presenter as live on air. The question hung unanswered as millions speculated in real time. Inside Buckingham Palace, phones rang incessantly, aides exchanged anxious glances, and no one seemed to know who authorized the press release. Yet somewhere in the upper corridors of royal power, the decision had already been sealed. Those closest to the king knew he had been deeply troubled for weeks. Reports from staff described him as distant, pacing his private study long after midnight, muttering about restoring balance and preserving the crown's dignity. Insiders claimed he had grown increasingly uneasy with the direction of the monarchy, not politically, but emotionally. Something or someone had broken the fragile unity of the royal household. The decision to alter the line of succession was not born out of reason, it was born out of turmoil. Senior royals, blindsided by the timing, were left reeling. The Queen Consort reportedly learned of the decree only moments before it went public. Prince William's aides were said to be caught in absolute disbelief, while Princess Anne was seen making an urgent call from her residence at Capcom Park minutes after the announcement. Even palace veterans, those who had weathered decades of scandals, confess that this felt different. This was not a rumor nor a public relations misstep. This was an intentional act of royal defiance, issued from the very top and wrapped in mystery. The wording itself was the greatest clue: sovereign will. It suggested this was not the advice of Parliament nor the influence of courtiers, but a decision made solely by the king himself. That phrase carried a chilling echo of authority, one that bypassed the machinery of tradition. For the first time in modern history, a reigning monarch had invoked personal power to reshape the monarchy's future. But why? What compelled Charles to risk public outrage, political scrutiny, and perhaps even his own legacy to make this move? Speculation ran wild. Some said it was health-related, a preemptive restructuring before inevitable decline. Others whispered of betrayal, hidden documents, or private findings that questioned long assumed truths about bloodlines. Theories grew darker as hours passed. Could this be the king's revenge for years of humiliation, a desperate attempt to silence dissent before it reached his throne? Or had the monarchy's most sacred lineage finally been shaken by a truth too devastating to conceal? In the early hours of morning, the palace curtains remained drawn, guards at attention, and the silence inside Windsor felt suffocating. The great institutions of state waited for answers that never came. Britain, the Commonwealth, and the watching world stood united in one emotion: uncertainty. As dawn broke over Windsor, whispers inside the palace grew louder, because everyone wanted to know who was being removed and why now. 2 days before the announcement, a convoy of unmarked vehicles rolled into Sandringham under the cover of night. Inside the king's private study, only 4 names were on the list: Charles, William, and an unknown advisor whose arrival raised eyebrows. What was said in that sealed room would alter the monarchy forever, and by sunrise one royal's fate was already decided. The night was cold, tense, and unnervingly quiet, the kind of stillness that precedes something irreversible. Eyewitnesses recalled the unusual movement of guards stationed across the Sandringham East, each post reinforced as though anticipating intrusion. Windows were blacked out, corridors cleared, and the press, who usually lingered nearby, had been pushed far beyond the gates, even for royal meetings. This was excessive. Something was different about this gathering, something secretive, deliberate, and undeniably urgent. When the king entered his private study, those present said he looked unlike himself, pale, withdrawn, clutching a small leather folder marked "Private Royal Decree." His hands trembled slightly as he sat, glancing at the ornate clock, as if counting down to a moment only he understood. "Princess," and ever the voice of reason broke the silence. First she urged caution, reminding her brother that sudden decisions could ignite public turmoil. Her words hung in the air, met only by the faint crackle of the fireplace. The king did not respond immediately. He simply looked down, as though the weight of what he carried was already crushing him. Prince William remained silent throughout, his expression unreadable. Insiders later described his demeanor as chilling, a mixture of stoicism and quiet dread. He neither objected nor agreed, merely observed, as if burdened by knowledge he wished he didn't possess. The atmosphere was suffocating, a silent power struggle unfolding behind polite restraint, and defiance against the unknown plan made her seem the only one willing to challenge the inevitable. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from conviction. "Once this is done," she warned, "there's no turning back." And then came him the mysterious advisor, identified in palace records only as Sir L. His name had never appeared publicly before. He was not a royal aide nor a politician. His presence alone raised suspicion. Those who later pieced together the events of that night believed he was the man who brought evidence, something buried deep within royal archives, tamed. But a royal butler later revealed one chilling detail. As the king dismissed the meeting, he whispered under his breath, "It's time to set things right." The words struck like thunder through the palace corridors. For decades the monarchy had operated under the illusion of stability, yet in that instant the king's tone carried something final, the sound of a legacy being dismantled. When the doors opened hours later, the expressions on each face told a story no press release ever would, and looked defeated. Her jaw said in quiet fury. William, still silent, avoided his father's gaze. The king, holding the decree folder tightly against his chest, gave no explanation. Guards escorted the unknown advisor out first, and as his car vanished down the gravel path, a sense of irreversible change settled over the estate. By the time the cars left Sandringham, the balance of power had shifted, and one royal heir had unknowingly been erased in a move that no one believed possible. The palace confirmed the removal of a direct heir from the royal line. The name sent shockwaves through the nation. Someone born into destiny, suddenly stripped of everything behind closed doors. Tears fell, tempers flared, and the betrayal ran deeper than blood. This was not a decision, it was a royal execution of legacy. When the news broke, the country froze. The official statement, in that cold, formal tone the palace reserves for moments of irreversible gravity, was brief yet devastating. It declared that following a sovereign reassessment of royal duties and constitutional stability, one position in the line of succession had been legally withdrawn. The phrasing was clinical, but the implication was brutal. The message was unmistakable. Prince Harry, once the beloved son of the future king, had been cut off from the throne entirely. The announcement landed like a thunderclap, leaving even royal correspondents speechless. The statement framed the decision as part of a modern restructuring, a euphemism that fooled no one. It wasn't modernization, it was punishment wrapped in polished words. The tone suggested finality, as though a centuries-old birthright could be erased with a stroke of a pen. For the public it was unthinkable, for the royal family it was deliberate. Those within the palace whispered that this wasn't just about protocol or optics, it was personal. And in that single moment the monarchy crossed a line that no generation before had dared to approach. When Meghan heard the news, palace insiders say she collapsed to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. Her cry, "He still his father's son," echoed through the walls of their California estate, a heartbreaking testament to a wound that ran deeper than distance or duty. The couple's team scrambled to confirm whether the story was even real, for there it was, printed in black and white across every British front. Age by mourning for Meghan, it was the cruel confirmation of everything she'd feared for Harry. It was the moment his royal past became a ghost he could never resurrect. Back in London, the shock turned to fury. Advisors revealed that King Charles had signed a decree himself without consulting the Privy Council, or even seeking legal mediation. One aide reportedly begged him to reconsider, warning that the optics would destroy public trust. But the king's response was cold, unwavering. "I have made my decision." That phrase became an echo of finality that even the most loyal courtiers found chilling for a man known for restraint and deliberation. This was an act of unfiltered emotion, a king's vengeance disguised as reform across the nation. Public reaction split into some saw the move as long overdue, a final consequence of Harry's rebellion against tradition, but others called it vindictive, a stain on the monarchy's image that reeked of cruelty and desperation. Protests erupted outside Buckingham Palace. Placards read, "You cannot disown blood," while others demanded the restoration of Harry's place. Meanwhile, social media ignited into chaos, half of Britain mourning the fall of a prince, the other half cheering what they called the king's iron hand. The tabloids, always hungry for scandal, went into overdrive. "The succession scandal of the century" screamed the headlines alongside grainy photos of Harry and California appearing hello-wide, and broken reporters dissected every past royal feud, tracing the cracks that had finally split the crown into political. Commentators speculated on constitutional fallout, while international networks framed the monarchy as a family at war with itself. The image of royal unity, carefully curated over decades, shattered overnight. But behind all the polished statements and televised commentary, something far darker stirred within palace walls. Because this wasn't simply about reform or even betrayal, it was about old wounds that had never healed. Words said years ago, grudges buried under ceremony, and emotional debts unpaid were beginning to resurface. And as the dust settled over the nation's disbelief, one truth began to emerge: that deep inside the palace, this was more than just punishment. It was revenge, years in the making. For years, whispers of betrayal haunted the monarchy. Private letters, leaked interviews, and cold silences that tore the family apart. Now King Charles's decision wasn't about justice, it was about reclaiming power. He was haunted by the ghost of Diana's defiance, the rebellion of Harry, and the shadow of public doubt. The king wanted control restored, and to do that someone had to be sacrificed. Behind the palace a storm was brewing. Advisors close to the king had cautioned him repeatedly, warning that his decision to alter the royal line would open old wounds that had barely healed. But Charles wasn't listening. He had carried the weight of public humiliation for years. The documentaries, the tell-all books, the emotional scars that followed him even into his reign. Every headline about betrayal and broken trust felt like a dagger twisting deeper into the monarchy's heart. This to him wasn't just about discipline, it was about restoration, a reclamation of dignity that he believed had been stripped from the crown ever since the loss of Diana. Within the palace, an internal memo began circulating, a chilling piece of writing that few were ever meant to see. It described the king's state of mind as driven by emotion, not law. Those words alone sent ripples of fear through the upper corridors, because when a sovereign begins to act from emotion, the line between monarchy and vengeance blurs dangerously thin. The monarchy had survived scandal, death, and revolution, but it had never faced a king who ruled with a heart so burdened by ghosts. Staff began to whisper that this was no longer the reign of stability Britain had hoped for. It was the era of reckoning. Prince William, though silent, became the quiet center of speculation. Insiders claimed that his silence was not neutrality, it was protection. He understood the cost of defiance better than anyone. He had watched what rebellion had done to his brother and knew that to challenge his father now would mean igniting another royal war. Behind closed doors, William reportedly told close aides, "I can't stop him, not this time." His silence became the unspoken approval the king needed, a sudden surrender in the face of his father's determination. Camilla, ever pragmatic and politically sharp, was said to have played her part. To courtiers whisper that she encouraged the king to act before public sympathy turns again. She had seen tides shift before from hate to pity and pity to heroism, and she knew that timing was everything. Her counsel was clear. Hesitation could make them look weak. For Charles, that was unacceptable. Weakness had haunted him for too long. In every headline, every comparison to Diana, every accusation that he lacked resolve, this was his moment to prove otherwise. Yet not everyone stood in agreement. Senior courtiers, the same men and women who had served his mother, begged for caution. They warned that such a move could tear the monarchy's inner circle apart. They feared not just the political fallout, but the emotional fracture it would cause within the royal family itself. But the king would not be moved. History will understand, he reportedly said. I must protect the crown even from those I love. Those words, spoken in private, carried the chilling finality of a man who had chosen duty over affection. And when the decree was finally issued, the divide became irreversible. Behind the facade of calm statements and regal composure, relationships crumbled, trust dissolved. The courtiers, who once stood as the monarchy's loyal guardians, began to turn on one another, accusing, leaking, whispering. What had once been a house of tradition was now a house of tension, one where every word felt like a weapon and every silence a betrayal. The royal family had survived public scrutiny, but it was now collapsing from within, and as one royal fell, another quietly rose, bringing with them a shocking new face of the monarchy's future. Then came the revelation that no one, not even the closest insiders, saw coming. The reason the line of succession had been rewritten wasn't merely punishment, it was replacement. A name buried in secrecy, born of royal blood he had hidden from history, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. This wasn't the fall of a prince, it was the resurrection of a ghost. When the palace issued its follow-up statement, it was short but explosive. Following a private lineage review, His Majesty has confirmed the addition of a recognized descent into the royal line. No explanation, no elaboration, just a cryptic confirmation that shook the monarchy to its core. Within minutes, global media descended into chaos. The idea that another heir, one outside the known family, had been quietly legitimized under royal decree was unthinkable. Who was this person? Where had they been all this time? And why had the king chosen this moment to unveil them? Questions multiplied, but answers were scarce. The crown had spoken, and Britain demanded to know who now stood among them. Spurs began to emerge from the inside, fragments of information from those too shocked to stay silent. Anonymous sources hinted that months before the public announcement, a series of private DNA tests had been quietly conducted. The testing wasn't ordered through any government channel, but through royal physicians under direct instruction from the king himself. It was said that the results had confirmed a truth that had lingered like a shadow over the monarchy for decades, that somewhere beyond the gilded gates a bloodline long forgotten still flowed with royal heritage. That truth, once buried, had now been unearthed by the king's own hand. The more people dug, the darker the story became. Palace staff, who had served under both Elizabeth and Charles, began recalling our details from years ago, whispers of an affair, a love story that was never meant to exist, a child whose birth had been covered by silence and power. Though no names were confirmed, speculation spread like wildfire. Some believed it connected to the tumultuous years following the breakdown of Charles, his marriage, others to relationships long before Camilla. But one thing was clear, this revelation wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate act of recognition, a royal resurrection crafted in secrecy. Princess, known for her steel composure and unshakable loyalty, became the unexpected center of speculation. Reports claimed that she had known for years, bound by oath and duty to protect her mother's legacy and her brother's throne. Those close to her said she looked haunted in the days following the announcement, torn between loyalty to the truth and the consequences of it being exposed. Her silence, once seen as devotion, was now being questioned as complicity. Had she been protecting the monarchy or hiding its deepest secret? Parliament, blindsided and humiliated, convened an emergency discussion to address what they called an unprecedented breach of constitutional transparency. Behind closed doors, lawmakers debated legitimacy, succession, and the potential for a national crisis. Could the monarch unilaterally recognize a previously unknown heir? Did this mysterious figure now have a legal claim to royal inheritance? The questions were more than ceremonial, they touched the heart of Britain's very identity. But while politicians argued the public was enthralled, social media erupted with theories, old photographs resurfaced, and amateur historians scoured archives for any clue that could connect the dots. The phrase, "the royal child the world never met," became a viral obsession. Every detail, every whisper of scandal or resemblance was dissected in real time. The nation found itself captivated by a story that blended myth, betrayal, and destiny, as if history itself had been rewritten overnight. And as the identity of the hidden heir began to surface, one name echoed louder than any other, the name that could tear the crown into when the king's private secretary